But anyway, yeah, we've been talking about these globalist elite texts where they essentially lay out their one world grid system, control system, the beast grid system, all powered by technology and transhumanism, absolute comprehensive control over the mind, the body, and the soul, and having access to technology that allows this control system to, for the first time, actually exert comprehensive, centralized, global control over the entire populace without the use of overt, brute physical force, which, people tend not to like. It's a lot easier to run a tyrannical system if the people that are at the whim of it don't even really know that there is a tyrannical system. There is no revolution to be had. There will be no revolt if you aren't even aware of anything to revolt about. There's nothing to revolt, against if you don't even know that you're in a technocracy, right? A technologically driven, centralized control, top-down global control system, right? At the beck and call of a centralized organ managing the affairs of all of mankind. Well, that's what people like on your screen right now not necessarily call for, but they write about, and in some ways they do call for it. Bertrand Russell, we're going to be looking at his story here, his book, The Impact of Science on Society. More specifically, the themes Bertrand Russell messes with here: over-organization, scientific precision on a social engineering level, and how that leads to a scientific oligarchy, how it leads to essentially what Huxley and what we've covered multiple times would refer to as a scientific caste system, a eugenics, transhumanism-based system, right? We're talking about overpopulation being an issue, and other planetary emergencies is what I call them, right? Your climate change, other environmental things, food shortages, overpopulation. These require global cooperation, okay? And this is what people like Bertrand Russell call for, or at least write extensively about as being a very likely potential future, not far down the line, right? A one-world centralized control system that manages the affairs of the globe. And Bertrand Russell himself, in this book I'm about to show you right now, calls for one world government. Like Julian Huxley, the first chief of UNESCO, he believes that essentially we need to centralize. We need a world government. We need a world control system. Otherwise, the species isn't going to make it. We get into these petty, barbaric wars, right? Barbarians, right? Barbarism. That's what our world is, with sovereign nation states and individual countries that get into wars, which he also refers to as the really only constant form of population control, and it isn't very effective. It's not getting rid of enough people. That's what Bertrand Russell thinks. And essentially, he says if you apply the scientific method, if you apply scientific persuasion, scientific precision on a societal-wide level, you're going to be able to run the entire society with scientific precision as if you were tinkering with, say, a microchip or a circuit board. This is what he's trying to say, is technology is going to increase organization. And just like Julian Huxley says, or Aldous Huxley too, he says, to combat overpopulation and climate change, essentially, we're going to end up over-organized. In our attempt to organize the population, the only way to do it is through technology. We're going to end up over-organizing society and civilization as a whole. In other words, there's really no way tyranny can't bloom. It's just asking to be exploited and taken control of, seized entirely. And that's what Bertrand Russell goes on to state, that a scientific oligarchy is almost inevitable in certain circumstances. The beginning is a little slow, but guys, it heats up. We start talking about birth control. We start talking about wars, not killing enough people to keep the population from exploding. He goes on to talk about how, like, if only a plague could be spread once every 100 years, that would ensure the population goes down. He talks about controlled breeding, scientific breeding techniques that allows only a certain population to be birthed, certain genetic traits, eugenics, as Bertrand Russell, once again, was a eugenicist at least at one time. It gets fucking wild. So this is the important part, quote, one of the most obvious results of industrialism is that a much larger percentage of the population live in towns than was formerly the case. The town dweller is a more social being than the agriculturalist, right, living in these rural areas, and is much more influenced by discussion. As I said, they're swayed very easily. In general, he works in a crowd, and his amusements are apt to take him into still larger crowds. So this is the case of the city dweller, the city slicker. They're influenced by discussion is the major part. Once again, like I said earlier, they become sort of like an amorphous blob, a hive mind of sorts, composed of millions and millions of separate little people or data points. But really, since they believe all the same stuff, they're really just a big blob of whatever ideology you want to say, right? Oh, he also says the increase of organization has brought into existence new positions of power. So once again, guys, his argument is in the very effort of increasing organization of the population, it inevitably breeds a scientific oligarchy. And the increased power of officials is an inevitable result of the greater degree of organization that scientific technique brings about. Let's repeat it. Let it sink in. Quote, the increased power of officials is an inevitable result of the greater degree of organization that scientific technique brings about. Moving forward, it has the drawback that it is apt to be irresponsible. Behind the scenes, power, like that of emperors, eunuchs, and kings, mistresses in former times. To discover ways of controlling it is one of the most important political problems of our time. This is a little concerning. Page 51. Quote, as we have seen, the question of freedom needs a completely fresh examination. Yeah, we need to redefine freedom, because freedom, moving forward, is not what the freedom you think is freedom. Freedom you've experienced. We got to change that. Kind of reminds me of Julian Huxley and UNESCO, its purpose and its philosophy. He calls for, what does he call for a fresh examination of? Oh yeah, Huxley in the UNESCO paper talks about revisiting equality. He said we need to redefine equality, and it was something like equality due to the capabilities and aptitude of each individual, something like that. So in other words, you're only as equal to others depending on your aptitude in something. Let's tack on freedom. We need a fresh examination of freedom. What is freedom really? And can we all really truly be free in the general true sense of freedom if we're looking to survive as a species on this planet? I mean, your population is out of control. You're terrible to the environment. You're killing the planet. Pandemic, wars, viruses, disease, food shortages, overpopulation, aliens are coming too. We need to defend against that. Planetary emergencies. We need to unify it. Let's continue before I start getting goofy on you guys. Quote, the effect of the telegraph was to increase the power of the central government and to diminish the initiative of distant subordinates. This applied not only to the state, but to every geographically extensive organization. We shall find a great deal of scientific technique has a similar effect. The result is that fewer men have executive power, but those few had more power than such men had formerly. Let me repeat that. Very important. Page 35. So scientific technique has a similar effect, and this is the effect it has. The effect of scientific technique deployed on a societal-wide social engineering scale is the result is that fewer men have executive power. But those few have more power than all of the kings and queens and rulers of the past have ever had, because we have technology at our hands to demand our subordinates, millions, billions of them, with the internet, with the telephone, with the telegraph, right? So once again, this is why things become centralized. You have fewer men that have so much power. Well, it's a lot easier to dictate the responsibilities to fewer men. They'll take the responsibility of the power grid. They'll take the responsibility of Silicon Valley technology companies. We'll take Hollywood. If it now, due to technology, only takes a handful of men to comprehensively control an entire sector of industry, you're going to essentially just have loyalists and implant them into each separate industry, like I mentioned. He goes on to write, quote, it is, however, just possible that mankind may prefer to survive and prosper rather than to perish in misery. And if so, national liberty will have to be effectively restrained. Page 50, that's right. Remember, we need a fresh examination of freedom.
Well, how's that, Bertrand Russell?
Well, I was thinking, if it's possible that mankind might actually prefer to survive rather than prosper and perish in misery, national liberty is going to have to be restrained. Again, freedom as you know it is disappearing. We literally cannot survive if we have individual freedoms going unrestrained, right? Because individual freedoms, they can be disruptive. We cannot have that. We're talking about the survival of our species. Do you want human beings to survive, or do you want us to be wiped out? Do you want us to go extinct? You want us to go the way of the woolly mammoth? Get your act together. Climate change, food shortages, keep your lights off 24/7, conserve power, conserve energy. You got to do your part to combat the planetary emergency. It's life or death. This transcends morals. I don't want to do it, but I have to for the survival of the greater good, survival of our species. Yeah, all bullshit, all a guise, all a veil, right? We know this. Yep, gotta destroy countries, national sovereignty, and we also have to restrain unrestricted national liberty and give a fresh examination to freedom. But guys, let's end this video off with perhaps the best quote, and there's actually more, I don't want to say the best. Page 117, quote, "There are 3 ways of securing a society that shall be stable in regards to population." Now we're getting into overpopulation. The first is that of birth control. The second, that of infanticide, or really destructive wars. And the third is the general misery, except for a powerful minority. All these methods have been practiced. Again, the centralized power structure would not be forming if it was not for the advent of technology that has finally, for the first time, allowed it possible for a small group of people to seize control silently without making it overtly noticeable that they are taking over, right? That they're enslaving us slowly but surely, like over time. This is a decades and decades and centuries and centuries. Like I said, they were talking about this in the 1700s, and Bertrand Russell acknowledges himself. Now we finally have the technical capability to do it. Now we do. Julian Huxley says verbatim the exact same thing in UNESCO's Purpose, his essay. He says, he even goes so far as to say now it's technologically possible for the first time. So these people are all on the same page here. Okay, so this is what we should be reading. You heard it from the man himself. Population is going to be important. It's the utmost planetary emergency because it directly affects everything else. If there's too many of you on this fucking floating rock, you're going to destroy the environment and make the Earth unsustainable, therefore extinction. Going to cause climate change, therefore extinction. More of you, more capability of a virus to spread, therefore a possible extinction. UFOs even, who fucking knows, right? They're probably gonna line them up to be some major threat. I mean, Jesus Christ, what's scarier than being vaporized by a fucking flying saucer that's a mile wide, you know? You tell me how you feel when the Phoenix lights come over your house, except they're hovering over every nationwide major metropolitan area, you know? Sitting there with its subsonic bass you can hear in your chest, but just remaining there silently. You'll do fucking anything. You'll get on your knees real quick, start praying. But it's only them listening, right? They scared the fuck out of you. Time to unify against the aliens and do whatever.